Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we review books of every genre, looking for the best of fun escapist books. Okay, today we're doing a book called Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, a romantic classic, a historical fiction. So I chose this because at the time I'm recording this, I'm not quite there, but close to the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. She was born on December 16th, 1775. So 250 years ago, almost around now. And so I thought, you know what? Let's do one of her books. I've never read any of her books, and so I thought this would be a good choice for honoring her and, enjoying one of the classics that I've never tried before. So I picked Sense and Sensibility rather than Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is considered her best book, but I knew the plot of that one. And I don't know the plots of the rest of her books, so I picked Sense and Sensibility to be surprised. So I will try and give you the plot of this book. I mean, it's a romance. You kind of already, even just saying that, you know what's going to happen. But I'll give you a little summary of the plot of the book without too much in the way of spoilers. There's going to be some. And then talk about it. Okay, so the plot is we have two sisters, Eleanor and Marian, and they are, we'll say, semi-impoverished, genteel ladies of marriageable age. And it starts out with their circumstances, kind of how they ended up the way they were. And then you go into their acquisitions of husbands. And it is a very slow-paced, calm kind of get to know both the sisters, their family, their acquaintances, everybody in their circle, and the gentleman that they're interested in. So one of them, Eleanor, who is really our main character, is interested in her, we'll call it brother-in-law, sort of. Her half-brother married somebody, and her brother is the person that she's interested in. And he seems interested in her too. Marianne considers this a kind of disappointing match, not because of the man himself, but because she doesn't see the passion that she expects. She wants a romantic, totally, that they say sonnets to each other and, it's totally swoon-worthy, like you would think of a classic romance. And Eleanor, however, she's like, I like him. He's a good friend. He's rational. We can discuss things. We get along well. What more could you want in a husband? And so she likes him. Okay, so Eleanor is sense. And Marianne, who wants the passion, is sensibility. Which in this case, since we don't really use sensibility in this way very much anymore, but it means basically she is a passionate person. That she wants that melodramatic, over-the-top type of emotion. That's what she's looking for. So within the first fifth of the book, the first little bit, Eleanor has set her cap on somebody, and he seems interested in her too. It just seems very mutual. And then Marianne finds her passionate, perfect man. He is the one that they can walk and talk about music, and they have the same interests, and they have the same personality, and everything seems to be going wonderfully, and everybody's like, that is a match made in heaven. They are totally going to get married. So Marianne has set her cap on somebody. And then, basically, both gentlemen, which I won't give it away exactly how, disappoint the girls. And they both find that they cannot marry the man that they are set on, for whatever reason. And so it's kind of this progression of what happens is their relationships and how everybody else around them reacts to these circumstances. And it's very slow-paced as you go along. This is not a super fast-paced, and it is not really very emotional in how you, the reader, responds to this. Like, it's not drawing on my emotions reading it. But it was very interesting. Like, I really liked the plot. because it kept me guessing. Because right at the beginning, they're obviously with these two gentlemen, and you're sitting there going, well, obviously they can't just fall in and marry these people, because what happens to the rest of the book? That would be a really short book. So you know something's going to happen, but you don't know what. And then when something happens, you're like, well, okay, how is this going to resolve? Because it's not obvious how it's going to fall out. Are they going to end up with the two men that they are interested in? Is it going to be two completely different men? How is this going to fall out? So the plot was actually really engaging and interesting. The pacing is, like I said, slow. This is a pastoral slice of life in the 1700s, and you feel it. You feel like you are in that era. Now, Jane Austen was writing in the 1700s for a contemporary audience who would be familiar with all this stuff, but as a modern audience, 200 years later, you look at that and go, that is very different. And this is another thing I really liked, the historical details. It was really interesting, some of the things. For example, one of the women wrote a couple of letters to the gentleman that she was interested in, and they were not engaged at this point. People were speculating that they might be engaged, but they weren't. And so they kept looking at it going, that's kind of scandalous that she would write him a letter. I mean, she must be engaged. That's the only reason that she would write him a letter. And that's kind of interesting thinking of modern day communication. Like, if I wrote a letter to some man, would somebody be like, oh, how scandalous? You know, it's just funny. So some of the different values, the expectations of these women on how they were to behave is really interesting from a historical perspective, and sometimes unexpected. So I really liked that. Again, the pacing being slow is actually a good thing in this case, which you wouldn't normally think it would be a good thing. But the slow pacing, because the women themselves have to wait a lot. You know, like they come to town and want to meet up with one of the gentlemen. And Marianne writes this letter to him and waits and waits and waits. And the way the book is written, you as the reader are also waiting in anticipation of what's going to happen. Is he going to respond? How is he going to respond? What's going to happen with this? And so you feel that sense of time passing and kind of that impatience, that anticipation. It builds it really well. That tension is happening to you as the reader along with the characters because of the way the slow pacing is done. So I think that was actually really a good thing, even though it's definitely not the modern pacing. So some other things that I liked would be the characters. This is a character-driven book, really not the plot-driven. Although it's centered around an interesting plot, it is really the characters that make it interesting. And for something written the way it is in very old-fashioned language and writing style, you still got to know the characters pretty well. And it was kind of interesting because sometimes the author has so many characters in it, you kind of feel like it's possible to get really lost in them, but they have such strong personalities that you usually don't. There were a couple characters I was like, who is that? Oh yeah, that's who that was. But for the most part, you don't. And they are not always flattering characters. This is not a case where the author has cookie cutter characters and they're all the same. They are very different people. So you have our main character, our sensible Eleanor, and our passionate Marianne. But you also have, for example, their brother and sister-in-law that I told you about before, and they are written so greedy, so focused on money all the time in every interaction that is just kind of almost a caricature, except people are like this. I mean, seriously, you could see people actually behaving this way. So it didn't cross the line into a caricature. Same thing with Mrs. Jennings, who is a gossip and a busybody. But at the same time, it wasn't mean-spirited, and you could see people acting like this. It's just they have very big personalities for the way it's written, and the author does a great job. Jane Austen does a great job with writing her characters to make them feel different and unique and vivid. So I liked the characters. And I liked the character, like Eleanor was a good woman, like you like her. Marianne sometimes is a little bit over the top, but I liked her. Mrs. Jennings isn't always likable, but I liked the way the character was written, or things like that. I liked the characters. Misunderstandings abound in this. That's part of the relationship difficulty, and that can come across as humorous. I did like the kind of lighthearted tone in that a lot of the case. It doesn't feel like something that would, make a reader upset. I liked the tone of the story. So that was good. So there are a handful of things I dislike about this. Not very many, but some. One of which is some occasionally, all right, so the language is old-fashioned. It makes it harder to read to a modern audience, not surprisingly, just like when I was doing Ivanhoe, although I think Ivanhoe is older. But, some of the phrasing, it's like the author felt like you cannot do a sentence in 5 words if you can do it in 30, that kind of feeling. And lots of the words have to be multisyllabic, multisyllables, to really convey the nuance. And so it's harder language than our modern novels are. So that just makes it slower reading. I didn't love that because it actually, I don't think, added to it. I mean, obviously the way people talked, at least according to her, very different than they do today, and some of the phrases, of course, are not common today. You don't go up and press somebody's hand, and they were constantly pressing each other's hands. Or there's only a couple of words, however, that are spelled differently than they are modern days. For example, the word stayed, as in I stayed at somebody's house. We would spell it with S-T-A-Y-E-D. And in her book, she spelled it with an I, S-T-A-I-E-D. So a couple of things like that where it's very different from our modern words. So that can make it a little harder to read. I didn't love that because it does make it harder to be immersed in the story. And that includes also the way it's written, not just the words themselves. So, for example, she does not write where she gives people's expression or say they said with fury or sadness or whatever, some sort of emotion attached to it. It's a lot of chunks of dialogue with chunks of introspection and chunks of description of the scenery. So not a lot of talking about body language or how people, emotionally reacted to things. So the emotion is actually given in the phrasing that they're using. So you read this and you go, was she being sarcastic? And then you read on and see how somebody reacts to that, and how they react to it kind of says, oh yes, she was being kind of sarcastic there, or whatever. It's not always obvious. That makes it harder to read. Okay, another thing that I didn't love is Marianne can cross into melodramatic, like the extremes of emotion that maybe some people feel that way and act that way, but to me, I didn't actually relate to Marianne's heartache in feeling like it was a realistic thing, like, oh, she was so disappointed she stopped eating and cried all night and refused to sleep and refused to talk and refused, that kind of thing, for days on end. And I'm just like, I can't relate to doing that for something like that. I mean, it just seems like too over the top, especially compared to Eleanor, who doesn't react that way when she has a heartbreak. And so, like I said, Marianne just feels a little bit too much sometimes to be realistic, but it's just her character. The last thing I'm going to say that I didn't like was the ending, actually. Not because of how it turned out, but because of how it's written. So we have the ending, what happens to the people. So who Eleanor ends up with, who Marianne ends up with, and it feels like the author was like, I'm done with this story, let's wrap it up in an epilogue, give one paragraph, and they got married, kind of thing. So I'm going to read to you, right at the end, I have it on a digital, I read it from Gutenberg Projects, the free, because this is in public domain, which I will have a link to below, but, so I can't tell you a page number. But Marianne, everybody is thinking she should marry a certain person, okay? And I will leave it at that. And so we have one paragraph where it lists everybody who's interested in her marrying this person. With such a confederacy against her, with a knowledge so intimate of his goodness, with a conviction of his fond attachment to herself, which, at last, though long after it was observable to everybody else, burst on her, what could she do? I'll skip a paragraph. Instead of falling a sacrifice to an irresistible passion as once she had fondly flattered herself with expecting, instead of remaining even forever with her mother, and finding her only pleasure in retirement and study, as afterwards her more calm and sober judgment she had determined on, she found herself at 19 submitting to new attachments, entering on new duties, placed in a new home, a wife, the mistress of a family, and the patroness of a village. So that is her getting together with the guy. That was it. You just had this, everybody kind of was like expecting her to do it, and she basically was like, okay, I guess I'll give in to it, and so she did. I mean, do you feel any kind of satisfaction in that? You really don't. It really feels more like this should be a side character, and it's just mentioned, oh, this is what happened to her. And this was like within, 5 paragraphs from the end of the book. So her happily ever after was just, and she became a wife. She submitted to what everybody else thought she should do. And it just kind of feels dissatisfying. Now, Eleanor's ending felt pretty similar, a little bit better because she had a little bit more emotional attachment and stuff, but it still felt like, and he asked her mother for a contract to marry her, and she was satisfied with that. That's basically it. They don't really have, this is not a story, this is not a writing, maybe not, it wasn't the thing at the time, but they do not have any kind of love confessions, no realization that this is the person for me, no real feeling of that climactic scene of, and they chose each other and confessed or had a kiss or anything like that. Instead it was just, and they got married. The end. So the ending was, it was satisfying in what happened, not satisfying in how it was written. So I will say that. Okay, my overall conclusion is 2 thumbs way up. I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was really well written, especially for how old it is. I mean, if this was written today, I don't know that I would give it quite as much a positive review because of the way the language is done, but, you give it, concessions for how old it is. But I really enjoyed the plot. I really enjoyed the characters. More so than, honestly, I was expecting. I kind of came into it feeling like this is going to be a very boring book, and it really wasn't. It wasn't as boring as I was expecting it to be. I liked it. It was the kind of book that I enjoyed going back to, picking it up after I put it down. I will say I would be interested in reading more of her books, so that's about as high a recommendation as I can give. So absolutely, if you're interested in this kind of book, you want to catch up on your classics, you like romance or historical fiction, any of those kind of things, I would recommend it. Okay, on to part 2. I'm going to do a kid's book, 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. So I didn't actually realize until I saw this at the library that the Disney movie was based on a book. I should have, because I should have known that most of their movies, their older movies, were all based on stories that were already out there, but I didn't realize that for 101 Dalmatians. So I thought I would give that a try. So I'm going to try reading that one next. So I hope you joined me, and thank you for watching.